All right. Hopefully that was good. All right. We're ready for the afterburn? Okay, so this is the time that we take questions about the teaching, this teaching specifically. And if you have them on live stream, Robert will write them down. If you have them here, raise your hand. Zuri will bring around a mic. And who is going to get us started?
Yes, a little more of a comment and a question. I had certainly, I guess, experienced the fruit of what you were talking about having a single teacher. About halfway through the online discipleship class, I guess, is when I had, decided that you were going to be my teacher and left all the Facebook groups and the YouTube channels that you either hadn't vetted out or weren't part of, or they weren't part of this organization. And it just, it really released quite a burden to be in that type of experience where they're either not teaching correctly or, whatever it might be, that it just, but on the other hand, constantly get people sending messages about different ministries, and I try to be kind and loving when I tell them that I don't have any desire to listen to a teacher that hasn't been vetted out by you, and get then called names that I'm just a robot, or I'm not the priest in my own household. And so there's all types of challenges, I think, on both ends of the discipleship end, and that would be my question as far as like the discipleship am I correct in thinking that it's very similar to like a marriage relationship, and that like a Proverbs 31 woman would not necessarily be a woman, but is me under you and this same kind of role? It's not the same kind of roles, but it's very similar.
Yeah, basically, we have to first and foremost recognize that discipleship is a relationship. It's not just a teacher and a student, because a lot of you don't really think about when you went to school that you were in a relationship at all with that teacher, okay? But this is a relationship type of student-teacher, structure. Okay, there's a relationship there. And the relationship meaning that it's a relationship by agreement. See, you were in a relationship by default when you went to school. Okay, you went to school, there was a teacher, you were a student, and your relationship was by default. Whereas discipleship is a relationship by choice and by agreement. Just like marriage. I mean, you didn't marry everybody, you married somebody. Why did you marry that person? Because you came to an agreement with them that you were going to walk a life together and do certain things, whatever. There was an agreement. And so that wasn't the same agreement you had with everybody else of the opposite sex in your life, where you were going to have a relationship that was going to walk in a certain direction. So the same thing with discipleship. Now, when you look at things like the Proverbs 31 woman, you look at other things in Scripture, all of us have opportunities to understand both roles. In other words, we have leadership times, even ladies do, especially with their children. Ladies with other ladies, there are times where there's leadership roles. And men have to understand how to lead, but also how to follow. Everybody has to learn how to lead and to follow. Ladies get it more naturally because with their men, that's their role initially, is to be submissive to an authority of the male authority. But on the other hand, also, we all have to have the experience being in the middle. So that's why Abba allows you to have children or children to work with, so that you can know what it's like to also be in that leadership. Because you know what? Some of you ladies may experience the children treating you in the same way you treat your husband. And you get all mad at that child. Why does the child not listen and treat me so disrespectfully? And then realize because Abba wants you to see what it feels like. And sometimes an outside person can point that out and say, oh, well, that's because they're just doing what you do to your leader. See, all of us can fit into that place. Men, too. Men, you may be frustrated. Why won't my wife or my children or my family listen to me? Well, do you listen to those above you? We're all in the middle. There's only one not in the middle. That's the Father. Even the Son was in the middle. He had leadership responsibilities, but he also had to be completely submissive, almost like the Proverb 31 woman, right, to his father. And so that's part of what I teach in the discipleship classes, is to understand that all of us have to understand both directions. We're all in the middle. How do you treat those that you are responsible to serve? Because you're theoretically, we'll call it vertical in alignment. You're above them vertically, so they're in your care and you serve them. And also, how do you treat those who are above you vertically that are serving you and you're in their care? Everybody's in the middle. And by the way, you should be looking at those that are under you, how they treat you, as a way to think, oh, maybe that's the way I act too. Because that's why we're given to each other as mirrors. Okay, mirrors. Wives are great mirrors for the husbands. And so more husbands might get frustrated with a wife, you may realize, but that's because the Abba's trying to show you something. And not necessarily because she's right, but trying to show you that she's doing whatever she's doing to get your attention about something maybe you're doing to those above you. And so there's a mirroring there. Okay, children do the same thing. I counsel some parents, and a lot of times I'll know the parents well enough to say, well, but that's exactly the way you act towards your leadership. Either the husband or if the man towards the ministry, whoever, they're acting the way you do. But they're acting on their age level. So that whatever they're doing, though, but the attitude and the approach and the driving mindset behind it's the same as you do as an adult. And so this causes problems. So thank you for bringing that up, Craig. It's a good point. But all of us need to embrace, look, we're supposed to be, male or female, we're going to all be part of what's called a bride. So we have to understand whether you're a man or a woman, what it means to be the bride, and what that means to be then submissive to the bridegroom. I don't care what gender you were born with, we're going to all end up in that role at some point, and it's going to take the ability to trust. There's the biggest part, trust and submit. Because you wouldn't submit unless you trust. And a lot of reasons that you ladies don't submit to your husbands because you don't trust them. Well, why don't you trust them? Well, because they've messed up. Well, what did you do when they messed up? Did you encourage them? Did you tell them you believed in them so they could try again and do a better job? Or did you tell them what an idiot they are and kick them? Well, you don't understand. I understand. Between my own life as a husband and a father and being a son and having a father and parents, and also the thousands of hours of counseling, believe me, I understand. But we have to understand, we must understand, the reality is that all of us are doing this badly. We're doing our roles really, at a very low level of proficiency.
Well, you said you'd give us a new perspective on being unevenly yoked, and you certainly did. But I think one of the verses here that really hit with me was in Romans 16, 17 through 19. And the problem is teachings. Mm-hmm. And two words in those verses really stood out. And I see them as related, teaching and obedience. Teaching in 17, obedience in 19. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't do us any good to get the teachings unless we're obedient to what we hear.
It's funny because I was going to bring that out and somehow I just got distracted as I was talking, but let me just pull that out real quickly here. He's talking about in verse 17 through 19. In 17, it talks about, I call upon you, brothers, watch out for those causing divisions who are contrary to the teachings which you've learned. And then in verse 19 it says, but your obedience indeed is reported to all. Obedience to what? The teachings from the teacher that they were supposed to be following. But the thing is, there's such a backlash against this. Why? Because it's been done so badly and we no longer can trust. Is that not the reality? We don't do it because we don't trust it. We're afraid of it. We've had too many bad experiences. But that doesn't change the reality that we still need it. And it's still correct and it's still scriptural. Daweed.
I'm looking back over my life and seeing a lot of what you're talking about, because there's one thing that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt. No relationship ever is stagnant. It doesn't stay in one spot. It's constantly moving or shifting. It's either going backwards or it's going forwards. And whenever you stop and listen to somebody, you're giving them of your time and everything else. So you're investing a little bit of your time in them to listen to what they have to say. So that's what it is with every teacher and that I've ever listened to in the past. whether they were on the Christian side of things or whether they were on the Orthodox Jewish side of things or anywhere in between, I was giving of my time to them to listen to them. And the more I liked, the more I listened to them. Therefore, I got more attached to them. And therefore, anything that they said would influence how I thought and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm hearing from you is that when you are in a relationship that you've said where you're my discipler, you're my rabbi in that sense, you're the one that's abundant in Torah that I'm going to listen to and I'm going to do my best to study under,
Mm-hmm.
it changes the dynamic because you're saying that I'm going to listen to you and do what you're saying, but then there's no more the situation where, like, for example, husband and wife. You can't say I'm husband and wife and then automatically, okay, I'm going to listen to this other man and start getting involved with him. Then it becomes almost an adulterous fling.
And by the way, that destroys many, many marriages, is that the wife or the husband is now starting to listen to another man or woman. And that absolutely happens on a very regular basis. And so it's the same idea. All relationships have certain similarities to them, and they can transfer. The ideas that work in one will work in the other, and the things that don't work in one don't work in the other. The first thing we have to do is come to realize whether or not we actually are supposed to be in one. Do we need that relationship? And I think scripturally that we do.
Okay, my question is about, and I was very excited to know that you did go through the part about the wheat and the tares, but the part in there that really gets my attention, that's why I say I'm excited about it, because I've studied it personally a lot, where it talks about, the harvest is the end of the world and the reapers are the angels. I think that you could even make a presentation just on that all by itself. So I'm looking at the angels are the reapers, the angels of the harvest. Would you care to expound any more on that at all?
Nope. No, I mean, look, this gets into the end time type of stuff that I don't, for whatever reason, I don't have the drive, which is good because it would distract me terribly, okay, to try to figure out all of these things that I just need to know that there's those that have the job and it's not mine and they'll take care of it. That part I need to know. Trying to figure out how that all plays out would be really, I think it would be very fascinating and interesting to kind of go into it more. I'm glad that I don't have that drive, though, because it would distract me from these other things. Okay? So if you have that drive, I'm not picking on you. I'm not trying to, it's just not mine because it's not where I'm at. But there are people that do spend a lot of time on that and find it very interesting. And I may even find it interesting to listen to somebody who expounded on it. It's enough for me to know it's not my problem. Somebody else has got that job. That's great. They'll handle it. My job is to worry about being a wheat. It's not my job to worry about the tares or about who gets to pick them and separate them. I just got to focus on being wheat. That's good enough for me, and that's what I teach. I want you to be wheat, and I want to teach you how to be wheat from what the Scripture says, and that's all that matters. But I do appreciate the question, but sometimes the answer is a simple no. It's just, again, those questions that keep coming up, and it's not just Randy who asks them, because Randy likes to get into some of that more end time stuff, but just realize it's not about him. I'm just not given that green light to go there at the moment. I think I'd find it fascinating, interesting, and everything else, but for whatever reason, I'm just not led in that direction at this point.
I just want to thank you for bringing up the fact that when Shaul was talking about being unequally yoked, he meant teachers. I just remember hearing that when they were going to train a new ox for the plowing, they would hitch it up to a more experienced, stronger one. And that makes a lot more sense to me now, so I just want to thank you.
You're welcome. And by the way, if you're unequally yoked and the animal could then pull and the thing doesn't go straight, it goes in a circle and other kinds of things. So yeah, so there's all kinds of metaphors for there that we can get. By the way, that doesn't, mean that marriages are not problematic and other relationships being unequally yoked. And so it just takes a lot of wisdom and counseling to know how to handle the fact that you may be unequally yoked because of the way Abba allowed that to happen. And so just because you are not yoked with a believer at the moment or doesn't believe the same as you doesn't mean you have to end that relationship. You need to counsel. I mean, if it's not causing a problem, it's kind of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay? Just because it's not working that great. I got a lot of marriages, but both people are believers and they're not working that great. So just because you're both believers doesn't mean marriage works great automatically. But if you know, just make sure you're counseling to understand how that plays out, because a lot of the body is a mixed marriage where somebody, and by the way, they weren't necessarily mixed when they got married. They were on the same page when they got married, but then one of them was brought into Torah observance and the other wasn't. And so what do you do then? You counsel. That's what you need counsel for.
Ephesians 5:11 says to, quote, expose the works of darkness, end quote, like exposing false teachers. How do we balance that with not being the one to pluck out the tares? The full verse of 11 says, and have no fellowship with the fruitless works of darkness, but rather convict them.
Okay, again, Greek into English can be tough. I think what it's really talking about is you not interacting with it and be convicted that that's something you need to do. It's not our job to convict them. And I'd have to look at the actual wording in that phrase and see how the Greek plays out. Again, changing languages gets to be problematic. But you need to be convicted of the understanding that because of what's going on, you're convicted that you need to have no part in it. And that's really the message that I think he's trying to get through. See, we have a problem where we still mess with stuff we shouldn't mess with or interact with things we shouldn't interact with it because we're not convicted yet that we need to stop. It's like the people that I will debate with on a regular basis who want to insist that somehow they still need to go to Sunday church and they still need to, like, well, I'm witnessing to them. Nonsense. If you were witnessing to them the way you claimed, they'd have thrown you out already. Because some of you tried that and you got thrown out. Okay? But they're not convicted yet that they need to stop. Every one of us has habits and behaviors and lifestyles that we're not convicted enough of. We're up here, we know we need to. Even in our heart, we might know we need to, but we're not convicted of it to make us actually make the change. And I think that's what the verse is talking about in Ephesians. It says, look, you need to not have any fellowship or interaction with these people, and you need to be convicted of that. Because it's not for us to do the convicting. If that were the case in Ephesians, Paul would be wrong, and we should be really concerned because that goes against everything else Scripture tells us about, that we're not to judge the people, and that's not our job. Okay? So context helps us understand. This is important. When you're looking at a verse, you may not always know what the verse is trying to say, but you should have enough context if you know all the rest of the Bible to know what it can't be saying. So I'll give you an example. So when people throw some of the verses in Paul's writings at me, I answer them this way. If Paul is saying what you think he's saying, well, then he's a heretic and needs to be thrown out, and we should just not even talk about it anymore. If they're saying that, in other words, if they're claiming that it's because of what he wrote, that Torah is done away with and we don't have to do these things and you can eat whatever you want, all these other things that they want to say. I answer them, instead of arguing with them, I simply say, look, if that's true, if that's really what Paul was saying, well, it flies against everything else the Bible says, then he becomes a problem. You need to throw him out. Now, I'm not saying he's a problem and you need to throw him out. I actually think he's not saying what they think he's saying. So I give them a choice. I said, your choice is either A, he's not really saying what you think he's saying, or B, he is and you need to just throw him out. And I usually just, quite frankly, I don't know if it's because I'm a wise guy, I say, I really don't care which choice you make. And I don't, because either way, they end up in a better place. Because if they're going to realize that he can't be saying what they think he's saying, whether they think he said it or not, if they throw him out, they fix the problem. And if they just realize he's saying something different, they fix the problem. And by the way, you don't need Paul anyway, or Peter, or John, or James, or any of those writings. We've talked about that before. Okay, they're helpful, they're nice, I'm glad they're there. They're supposed to be there, otherwise they wouldn't be in your book. This is the book he allowed us to have. But thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people came into belief of Yeshua and everything else, not having read one word of Paul's writings, or James, or Peter, or John. All they had was the gospel messages of the witnesses who were there and the Torah. You read this all throughout the book of Acts. Thousands upon thousands coming in, and they didn't have any of Paul's letters, any of John or James's letters, or Peter's letters, etc. So if it helps you to just put Paul down for a while, then put him down. It's not blasphemy. It's not going to keep you out of the kingdom just because you don't use Galatians or Ephesians or Colossians or Corinthians or whatever. If you can't handle it, then just put it down. Put it on the shelf. Maybe one day you'll come to a different place and you'll understand the translation issues and the problems with language and everything else, and you'll be able to handle him better. Nothing terrible about what I just said. There are people out there that claim he's a heretic and they would attack him and everything else. I don't agree with that necessarily, okay? I'd rather believe that he's supposed to be in there and he's just hard to understand.
Sam Castro wants to know, is there any application for today that can be gleaned from the situations in both Sinai with the Levites and Pinchas regarding our relations?
All right, there is, but there isn't. There is, okay, so I think what he's trying to connect is that the Levites stepped up when everything went bad with the golden calf and they were zealous and they did what they needed to do. And Pinchas stepped up, and a lot of people ended up dead in both cases. But, the bottom line, I think, is these were those that were anointed and appointed for a role. The Levites ended up getting the role because of what they did, and Pinchas already had the role because he was a Kohen. All right? And so we have to be careful that we use those roles that we see them doing to say that we now have that role to, because after all, I'm a king and a priest. Not yet, you're not. Maybe someday, but not now. Now you're lucky if you're a sheep. Let's focus on that. Instead of thinking you're a king and a priest and you're somebody and you're something. So the leadership may have moments where they have the opportunity to do a Pinchas, to step up and have to tell somebody, you need to go. I'm not talking about grabbing a spear and throwing it through them, but I'm talking about stopping the craziness that something's going on and saying, because I have no congregations that have counseled me, where members have counseled me saying, our leader won't stop this one person who's just destroying our group. So there is a problem where there's no Pinchas, and there should be a Pinchas. But you got to remember whose role that is. That's the leader's role. That's the leadership role. Okay? It's not just for anybody or everybody. Amen?
When the Bible says not to be yoked to unbelievers, and he's referencing the 2 Corinthians 6:14, could you expand on that? Like, as in the yoke, how can we be the light of the world and not be in yoke?
Okay, just give me a second to try to think. I'm trying to figure out what I think you're asking, okay? You can't be a light to the world unless you're yoked. Okay, you have to have at the very minimum Yeshua's yoke. Because it's in walking in submission to those instructions and teachings and becoming like your teacher, which is the whole discipleship role is to become like your teacher. Then you can't really be the light if you're not going to be discipled by the light, and so you could become light. So I'm guessing that that's kind of where that was going.
Would this make sense? Because as you were saying that, I think I realized what he was talking about. I think the difference is we're not in yoke to the world.
No. We're yoked to him.
That's the problem is we're
Right.
in yoke to Yeshua, not to the world.
Right. If you're yoked to the world, you cannot be a light to the world.
Yeah.
You'll be like the world, not a light. You'll be like them, but you won't be a light to them.
How can a significant other / wife have a positive influence on their loved one who is a red personality when they are judging others without usurping authority?
Now, wait. Now, the person who wrote that question, are you doing the judging, or are you claiming that the person with the red personality is doing the judging? Because the red personality is not likely to be the one doing the judging. A blue personality would, but not the red. So, look, the bottom line is that in understanding each other, the more you can understand the person, the more you can understand how you can help that person. But you have to seek first to understand them, where they're coming from, where their weaknesses are, what they're struggling with. And so if you're trying to help and you're dealing with some personality issues and conflicts, I would say call me and counsel me, because I happen to have a fairly high expertise level on these particular things. That's why I did the class on it and taught about it. So understanding how to understand yourself and others better through like using one of the personality style exams is actually very helpful, because it helps you to understand you better, and it also helps you understand the other people better, what your strengths are and what your struggles are, and what your weaknesses are. But the problem is this, though: if you're not trained at it, you'll wrongly assign what you think the other person's personality style is, and that happens a lot. I've had people come up to me claiming before they did the test, well, I must be this color or that color or whatever. And I say, no, I know you. That you don't understand what that color is talking about. So, but yeah, we could talk about that if you want to contact me, because you're describing something much more blue than red. And so, which is hard to discern sometimes. They look similar, just depends on the circumstance. Okay? But then once we figure that out, then I can give you advice on how to handle it. We are going to talk a lot more about why we do what we do and why we don't do what we should do and all kinds of stuff that, is going on in us, as time goes on. Because I think that's part of the biggest problem in the body is that, we have a hard time saying, understanding each other because we don't understand ourselves. Okay? I mean, how are you going to understand me if you don't understand you? And that's really tough, I remember in martial arts when we were, and that's going to throw a whole bunch of people into a tizzy when I mention martial arts, but, one of the things I remember the teacher saying many, 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 many years ago, I was a young teenager, was that if I can't learn to control my body, how am I going to control the person trying to kill me or hurt me? It's the same idea. I mean, if I don't have control over my physical body so that I can have balance and stand and move as I want and be in control, if I don't have control over me, how am I going to control a situation that involves a person other than just me? Well, the same thing with interacting as a body. If you can't figure out and understand you and why you're whatever you are, the mess that you are, how are you going to deal with somebody else in their mess? And then the more you understand you, the more you'll understand why there are aspects of their mess that are really no problem for you, and other parts that really are like oil and water and vinegar, I mean, oil and water, just, not oil and vinegar, that tastes good, right? But oil and water don't mix. I don't want to attack all the oil and vinegar guys. But, it doesn't mix. There's certain things. But other things that your weaknesses and their strengths can, fit nicely. And so when I talk to husbands and wives, a lot of times I find out, well, the reason they're struggling is because they have certain things in their personalities that just are just a terrible fit if they don't do a proactive fitting, if you understand what I'm saying. Instead of, by default, they don't fit. By default, there's a problem, but when they actually choose proactively, they can make it fit. Okay? Just because you have a certain personality type or style doesn't mean you can't choose to act differently. It just means that's your default if you do it without thinking. Your natural reaction. You understand what I'm saying? One of the things that I learned a long time ago, well, not even necessarily that long ago, but I was in studying this out with husbands and wives especially, is that, now this may sound really shockingly profound to you. Men and women don't get along. And then you put them together in a marriage and you wonder why they still have problems. However, a husband and a wife get along perfectly. The problem is if the man stays a man and doesn't become a husband and the woman stays a woman and doesn't become a wife, you wonder why they have problems? Of course they have problems. Because men and women don't get along. We don't see the world the same. Men are from Mars, women from Venus, all that kind of, whatever it is. We see the world so differently. But if you become a husband and you become a wife, those two can get along perfectly. So when people say, my wife or my husband is a problem, no, they're not. If you were your role and they were their role, you guys would be fine. But you're acting like a woman and he's acting like a man or whatever it is, and now you're having problems, of course. Because a wife is a different type of woman. A husband is a different type of man. It requires a conscious decision to subjugate certain things and consciously do other things to be a wife or a husband. Does it make any sense? Same thing in the body. For you to be a member of the body and for there to be leadership in the body, for you to interact with that leadership correctly, for the leadership to interact with you correctly, we have to understand that if we're coming just as men and women, we're going to have a problem. But if we come as sheep and shepherds, we can understand our place and our role, we can flourish.
All right, the question from Lindsay was, she's asking if you could speak a little more on not attacking Christians and instead having empathy for them, considering we were also blind ourselves before he called us out.
You just said it as good as I could have said it. Okay? I mean, look, you should have empathy, meaning you should feel what they feel because you were there. Most of us were there. Some people probably weren't, but 90-something% of you went through that journey. But also, it goes back to the many things I've said and even have focuses on it. Just leave them alone. Abba's, it's his call. What did we read today? It says that the Son has to reveal the Father to whom he chooses. We read that today in the verses. When we're talking about that knowledge and information that we're trying to share and understand, Yeshua says, I get to choose. You know, we were back in, what was it, Matthew 11, I think it was. Okay? So Matthew 11, where he says, all has been handed over to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Father except the Son, and to whom the Son wishes to reveal. This is the important part of the Father and the Son teaching, where we're at the beginning of it, we went through proving it's the Father that reveals the Son and the Son that reveals the Father, to whom they choose when they choose. Guess what that does? It takes you completely out of that loop. Unless they're being drawn to you to do the revealing, but then they're drawn to you, not you're being drawn to them. You're not seeking them. You're not knocking on them. You're not banging them in the head. He may draw them to you, and you got to be prepared to do that. But that job is just not yours. Yeshua says it very clearly. He says, the Father reveals the Son reveals the Father. And there's other verses other than just this one where it says those things. We read that in the other teaching, in the Father and the Son teaching. And so, sure, we should have complete and absolute empathy and fruit of the Spirit for all of our Christian friends. Because most of them, 99% maybe, I'm hoping, are still where they are because that has not happened yet. Not because they're rebelliously rejecting truth. Because guess what? And you can all raise your hands if it's you, if you want, I don't care. But how many of you, the first time someone tried to show you the truth, you just said, oh yeah. None of you. Amazing. So showing someone the truth is not what makes the difference. You have to be ready. Your peace has to be disturbed. All the things we talked about at the beginning of the CC101, right? The journey that we all go on. Because none of us, the first time somebody maybe came to us to say, well, don't you know that Sabbath isn't Sunday, or don't you know Christmas, or don't you know this, we were not all like, oh boy, that's what I've always wanted to know. But when you were ready, though, didn't you react differently? Then it became like, oh, I want more. But when you weren't ready, guess what? Almost all your friends, when I say almost all, like 99%, it's not their fault, they're not ready. He hasn't done what he needs to do to them that he did to you. So absolutely, thank you for bringing that point up. Stop giving grief, so much grief to your Christian friends. See, I could talk about the problems with it here to the body. Don't go back to that mess. You now know better. You shouldn't want that stuff. Don't be listening to Christian teachers. I got people telling me all the time, and they sending me links to Christian teachers. I said, why are we learning from and listening to Sunday keeping, pork eating? If they've not had that revealed to them, why do you trust them on everything else they're doing? If they can't get something as simple, I'm not saying it's their fault, I'm saying, but if they're not on Sabbath, eating right, and some of the basic things, the feasts, etc., why are you listening to them about anything? Why are they a source of anything? I don't get that. Now, am I picking on them? No. But why I should be helping you to understand, just stay away from that mess.
From Ken Chapman. Regarding being unequally yoked, who is my brother? Isn't it only those doing righteousness?
No, the brother goes back to those in the body, and we don't know, again, the wheat and the tares, so be careful that we get away from trying to figure out who's who as far as righteousness is concerned. Now you're sitting in the judge seat. If they claim to be in the body, seem to look like they're trying to be in the body, wherever they are in their walk, then we will treat them like a brother. Okay? In other words, they're sitting with you on Sabbath. They try to come to feasts and stuff. Even if they still work occasionally and do other things because they haven't quite gotten there yet, they've had certain things revealed to them, then you will treat them as a brother. You are to definitely treat them as a brother because you don't know how far along they are. You don't know how much work the Father still has to get done. You don't know how deep and dark that mess was that's being cleaned up and unraveled. So if they are at least doing some things to act like and show to be a brother, then treat them like a brother. However, if they're trying to lead people back in the other direction, then you are to do what it says, to have no fellowship with them and kind of put a little bit of distance from them. That doesn't mean you're judging them, just saying, I hope they get that cleaned up, and if they do, I'm willing to go back and interact with them. But for now, it depends on what they're doing in their walk. Look, it's come as you are, and of course we always finish up with, and please don't stay that way. But when it's come as you are, if you come as you are trying to get people to be as you are, you're a problem. If you're coming as you are seeking to grow and become Yeshua-like, then that's fine no matter how messed up you started out. but it's about where are you headed? Are you bringing people towards you, or are you heading towards people? In other words, towards people in the body. So if you see somebody coming into the body who seems to have no interest in growing and changing and getting people to start doing what they're doing, that person may be a problem. Bring that to the attention of leadership and just say, look, I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble. I just want you to be aware that I've seen something going on that may be noteworthy to have some attention, okay? That's not Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara, evil tongue, is the idea of trying to either publicly, even privately, shame or embarrass somebody in that kind of way. Okay? Seeing something with the idea of wanting it to be better for all is not Lashon Hara. Okay? So if you go up to the leader and say, well, can you believe what so-and-so is doing? That's probably going to end up being Lashon Hara. If you come up to leaders and say, look, I don't know if you're aware of this, but one of the members is struggling, at least seems like they're struggling with something, and others seem to be kind of getting the attention of that, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention in case it turns out to be a problem. See the difference? And then please do leadership a favor and mention the person's name. I hate when people do that. They'll come to me, well, I don't want to say who it is, and I don't want to blah, blah, blah. Listen, I can't really do anything if you don't tell me who it is. But I don't want to get them in trouble, and I don't want to be a tattletale, blah, blah. It bothers you enough to come to me. Well, I can't fix it if you don't tell me. Okay? So please, if you go to leadership, let them know who you're talking about. Okay? But also let them know that you're not trying to cause harm or shame or anything else. You're just concerned, and you wanted to bring it to somebody's attention who has the job to maybe do something about it.
When you mentioned unequally yoked or unevenly yoked, did you mean rabbis in Israel that did not acknowledge Yeshua as Messiah?
I didn't even have that thought at all, so I don't know how that would fit into this thing. Look, he's talking about those in the body and what they're doing. The instruction is to those in the body that should know better. Now, of course, Yeshua, when he says, take my yoke upon you, he's talking to the Jews, saying, you need to be willing to come over here and not just be listening to all of this stuff that the rabbis are all saying to you, and actually they weren't even probably called that at the time, but you need to be coming and taking my yoke. Let me teach you. Okay, you've had enough teachers out there, and there's a million of them out there, and said, well, come and sit under me. Let me teach you. Sit at my feet.
How do we respond to someone not in the body who says it's all about being a good person with no regards to commands of Yahweh?
Ask them for that verse. Because, I mean, actually, you know what you can do? You can go, I think the well done, good and trustworthy servant, the good one, the first part, good, deals with that. In other words, well, I just have to be a good person. Well, what defines good? Who defines what's good? So that would help, and I think pursuit of righteousness might help as well. But that's the whole thing, is that you want to ask them to give you that verse, okay, of what defines good. Well, you just have to be a good person. Well, what defines that? Who gets to define that? Because I can tell you there have been societies throughout the history of man that had things that were very commonly acceptable as being good behavior in that society that wasn't actually very good.
One Hard Van Ruin he wants to add a picture to the parable of the wheat and the tares. At harvest time, you can see the difference between the two. The tip of the wheat hangs downwards humbly due to the heaviness of the fruit, and the tares are straight up in the air, all prideful and empty of substance. And on side note, the tares, the darnel, are highly poisonous, so be careful.
Very, very good. I appreciate that comment. Very nice.
Ken Chapman was following up on his question, was saying that it isn't about trying to be Torah observant. Is a Christian my brother, a Muslim, a Buddhist, or is those that are consciously doing righteousness? My response to him was that you did actually touch on that, that if they are not trying to keep Torah or even willing to, much less against keeping Torah, then they are not your brothers.
Okay, correct. Well said. And I think I said the same thing. I mean, if they're in the body, or at least making an effort to be, or heading in that direction, that they should be treated as a brother. Because otherwise, we fall into the category of trying to figure out whether someone actually is or isn't, and then we end up in a problem place. But, if they show up at services and they're making some sort of effort and their claim is that they're trying to walk this out, even if they're doing it imperfectly, treat them like a brother. And hopefully they will grow into one, even if they're not there yet. Okay, however, if they're completely in a different walk, that doesn't mean we don't treat them nice and with all courtesy to do a proper human being. But if they're in Christianity or Buddhism or in Islam or in Taoism or in Hindu or, whatever million other religions there are out there, then they're not your brother. They're in a different family. Or you think about it as being a family. The children of Israel makes us, to be a brother, you've got to be an Israelite, because we are the children of our father Israel, so to speak, our father Jacob. And so that makes us brothers, or cousins at least, or related. But if they're under a different family tree in Islam or some other place, well, then they're not our brothers. However, that doesn't mean they get treated any less respectfully and with courtesy and with all those other things that are due human beings, because they're still children of the living Elohim. He still created them. So that gives them a certain amount of, a certain type of treatment that's due and proper. Amen?